You got burned this year, maybe not badly. Maybe just the tops of your shoulders, or that stripe on the back of your neck where your collar sat, or the tops of your feet in sandals, which is somehow always the worst one. And you knew within about 4 hours, that specific heat that does not come from outside you. The way a cotton sheet becomes an act of violence. Lying very still at 2 in the morning, radiating, wondering whether it is possible to sleep standing up. Then a week later the peeling, which everybody says is disgusting and everybody does anyway. Here is the thing nobody points out about that. Go to a zoo on a hot day and look at the animals lying in full sun, the lions, the camels, the wolves in their enclosure, flat out, panting, entirely unbothered. Not one of them is going to wake up tomorrow the color of a tomato and start shedding. Now, I want to be careful here, because you will hear people say only humans get sunburn, and that is not quite true. A pig burns. A hippo burns so reliably that it secretes its own red sunscreen, which for 100 years people assumed was blood. So dogs with thin white coats get burned. Any animal with bare pale skin has the same problem we do. But that is a very short list, and you will notice what everything on it has in common. Almost nothing that is covered in fur ever burns, because the sun does not reach the skin. The fur takes the hit, so the question is not really why you burn. The question is why you are the only large mammal walking around outside with nothing on. The answer everyone reaches for first is that some people are pale, and pale people burn. That is true, and it is also not an answer. It explains why your friend goes lobster in 20 minutes while you take an hour. It does not explain why either of you is exposed in the first place. A dark-skinned person can absolutely burn, given a strong enough sun and enough time. The difference between us is a difference of degree, on a species that is uniformly, strangely, naked. Every other ape has a coat, chimpanzees have one, gorillas have one. Orangutans have a magnificent one. We are the odd one out, and we did not lose the coat by accident or by neglect. We traded it, deliberately, over roughly 1 million years, for something we wanted more. And sunburn is the bill for that trade, still arriving, every summer, in installments. To see what we bought, you have to think about what a body does with heat. Everything you do makes heat. Walking makes it, thinking makes it, digesting a sandwich makes it. And a mammal has a very narrow band of internal temperature in which it works at all. A few degrees up and enzymes start failing, proteins start unfolding, and you begin making genuinely terrible decisions before you lose consciousness. So every animal needs a way to dump heat, and most of them are bad at it. A dog pants. That works, but it only cools the blood passing through one small wet surface, and a dog cannot pant properly while it is running flat out, because it needs the same airway for breathing. A big cat overheats fast and knows it. That is why the famous cheetah chase is 20 or 30 seconds long. It is not that the cheetah gets tired. It is that the cheetah is about to cook. We went a completely different way. You have somewhere between 2 and 4 million ochre and sweat glands spread over essentially your entire body surface. No other animal has anything like that density. And what they do is put water on the outside of you, where evaporation carries heat away, and evaporation is startlingly good at this. It is the reason a wet t-shirt and wind feels like being mildly attacked, but it only works on bare skin. Sweat under fur does not evaporate, it sits there, soaks the coat, and turns your insulation into a warm wet blanket, which is the exact opposite of the thing you were trying to do. A horse manages a version of this, sweating and lathering, but a horse is enormous and still overheats. For the system to work at all, the fur has to go. In 2000 for Dennis Bramble and Daniel Lieberman laid out the case that our whole body is built around this, that a long list of features that look and related are all part of one design for moving long distances in heat. Springy tendons, a nutshell ligament to hold the head steady, big joint surfaces in the legs, enormous gluteal muscles that only matter when you run. And, underneath all of it, a cooling system that only functions if you are naked. So we became the animal that can keep going in the middle of the day, when everything with a coat has to lie down in the shade and wait. That is a genuinely enormous advantage. The hottest hours of the day are the hours when nothing else wants to be out, and we could be out in them. We just had one small problem, which is that we had removed the sunshade. Dark skin is not the human default because of geography. It is the human default because of what we did to our fur. An ape underfur has pale skin. Shave a chimpanzee and you find something surprisingly light underneath, because it has never needed protecting. Once our ancestors dropped the coat on the equator, that pale skin was suddenly facing the most intense ultraviolet on the planet, all day, every day, for life. And ultraviolet does something to you that is worse than a burn. Nina Yablonsky and George Chaplin spent years mapping human skin color against measured UV levels across the globe, and the fit is close enough to be uncomfortable. Skin tracks sunlight, not race, not continent, sunlight. Their argument is that the thing UV is really destroying is folate. Folate is a B vitamin, and UV light breaks it down in the blood running through your skin, and folate is not optional. It is what you need to build a neural tube correctly in an embryo, which is to say it is what stands between a pregnancy and a severe birth defect. It also matters for making sperm, so a population that is naked on the equator and cannot hold on to its folate has a fertility problem and a birth defect problem, and those two things together are about as strong a selection pressure as evolution ever gets to work with. Melanin is the fix. It sits in the upper layers of your skin and absorbs UV before it reaches the tissue underneath. It is, functionally, sunscreen that you grow. And you still grow it. That is what a tan is. A tan is not damage in the way a burn is damage. A tan is your skin being told there is too much ultraviolet arriving and manufacturing more pigment in response, over days, exactly as the system was designed to. It is the old defense still switching on. It is just extremely slow, because it evolved in a world where the amount of sun you got in June was almost identical to the amount you got in May, which is precisely why a burn happens. Here is what is actually going on under your skin while you are lying there having a lovely time. Ultraviolet light is energetic enough to physically damage DNA. It knocks two neighboring letters of the genetic code into each other and fuses them, and a cell with enough of those cannot read its own instructions properly anymore. That is the raw event, and it starts immediately. What your body does next is the interesting part. Cells that detect that much damage do not try to carry on. They kill themselves. It is a controlled shutdown, and it is the right call, because a cell that keeps dividing with damaged DNA is where skin cancer comes from. So the redness is not the sunlight. The redness is the response, blood rushing to a site where a large number of your own cells have just been condemned. The heat is inflammation. The peeling, a week later, is the sheet of dead cells being evicted. And the reason you do not feel it happening is that none of this is instant. The damage is silent. The cleanup is what hurts, and the cleanup takes hours to organize. By the time your body tells you, the sun has been off you since lunchtime. By looking at variation in a pigmentation gene called MC1R, Alan Rogers and colleagues estimated that our ancestors already had dark, protective skin well over 1 million years ago, which also tells you the fur was gone before that, because otherwise there would have been nothing to protect. So the sequence goes. We lose the coat to run in the heat, and then we grow a new defense out of pigment, because the first thing killed us. For most of the history of our species, this worked. We were dark-skinned, we lived in high sunlight, we did not burn. And then we walked north. This is the part that surprises people, and it is worth slowing down for. Melanin is sunscreen, and sunscreen has a cost. Your skin also uses ultraviolet, the shorter wavelengths, to make vitamin D. That is not a small function. Vitamin D is how you absorb calcium, which is how you build a skeleton that works, and a child who cannot make enough of it grows bones that bend under their own weight. And this is not a theoretical risk that we inferred from genetics. We watched it happen. In the 19th century, industrial cities in northern Europe filled up with coal smoke thick enough to block a meaningful share of the sunlight, and children moved indoors into factories and tenements. Rickets went from uncommon to something close to routine. In some northern industrial populations it was the normal condition of childhood: bowed legs, deformed ribs, pelvises that would later kill women in labor. It was not cured by understanding the chemistry, because nobody understood the chemistry. It was cured by two things that worked for reasons nobody could explain at the time: sunlight and cod liver oil. That is a live demonstration, inside recorded history, of what happens to a body that does not get enough ultraviolet. Now imagine that pressure applied not to 1 century of one city but to hundreds of generations of people living at that latitude, and you can see why the pigment came off. In Africa, none of this is a problem, because there is UV everywhere and to spare. You can afford to block most of it and still make plenty. Move to Northern Europe and the arithmetic inverts. There are months of the year when the sun never gets high enough to deliver the right wavelengths at all. Now dark skin, which was saving your life at the equator, is filtering out light you cannot spare. So the pressure reverses, and pigment starts coming off. We can point at the machinery. In 2005, a team led by Rebecca Lamison found a gene called SLC248 with a variant that is close to universal in Europeans and close to absent in African and East Asian populations. And that single change accounts for a substantial slice of the difference in skin tone. It is not the whole story. Depigmentation happened more than once, by different routes, in Europe and in East Asia, but it is a big, legible piece of it. Here is the part that lands strangely. It is recent. In 2015, Ian Matheson and colleagues sequenced 230 ancient Eurasians and looked directly at which genes were under selection. And pigmentation variants show up as some of the strongest signals in the set, and they are still spreading well into the last several thousand years. Not deep prehistory, the Neolithic. People were already farming. The most vivid version of this is a skeleton from a cave in Somerset called Cheddar Man, about 10,000 years old, one of the oldest more or less complete Britons we have. In 2019, a team including Selena Brace published work on his genome, and the pigmentation markers came out pointing at dark skin, together with blue eyes. A word of caution, because this got reported very confidently at the time and the science is more careful than the headlines were. Predicting skin color from ancient DNA is genuinely uncertain. The models are built on modern populations, and a 10,000-year-old European is not a modern population. The researchers themselves put error bars on it. Treat it as the best available estimate, not a photograph. But even with the caution, the direction is not in doubt. Light skin in Europe is not some ancient founding characteristic. It is a late adjustment, made under pressure, for vitamin D. Which brings us back to your shoulders. You are carrying the results of two separate trades, and sunburn is what falls through the gap between them. Trade 1, about 1 million years ago, give up the fur, get a cooling system that lets you work in the midday heat. Excellent deal. Enormous payoff. Cost. Your skin is now exposed. Trade 2, in the last few tens of thousands of years for some populations, give up some of the melanin, get enough vitamin D to build a skeleton in a place with weak, slanted sunlight. Also an excellent deal in that place. Cost. You have removed the defense that trade 1 made necessary. Neither of those was a mistake. Both of them were the right call, in the place where they happened. Sunburn is simply what happens when you take a body optimized by both trades and put it somewhere neither trade anticipated. So what did they actually do about it, because they were outside considerably more than you are? Mostly, the answer is that they were not surprised by the sun. This is the least dramatic answer possible, and it is the correct one. If you live outdoors your whole life, you are not making decisions about sun exposure. You are simply not in it at the hours that matter, because everyone around you has always got up before dawn, done the work that needs doing, and gone flat in the shade in the middle of the day. Not as a health measure, as the obvious way to organize a day. There is one more piece, and it is one of my favorite small findings in this whole area. Ochre, the red iron-rich pigment that turns up at human sites going back a very long way, ground down, mixed with fat, and put on skin. In 2015, Rion Rifkin and colleagues did the thing nobody had bothered to do, which is test whether it actually works. They put real ochre on real skin and measured it, and it comes out with a modest but genuine sun protection factor, somewhere in the region of a low single-digit SPF, depending on the ochre. Now be careful with this, because it is very easy to overclaim. Showing that ochre blocks some UV does not show that anyone applied it for that reason. People use ochre for decoration, for signaling, for hide processing, for ritual, and it may have been all of those, and sunscreen was a side effect nobody named. What we can say is that a substance humans have been smearing on themselves for 100,000 years happens to work, a bit. Which is a fairly typical arrangement, when you look into what our ancestors were doing. The thing works, nobody has written down why, so think about what actually has to happen for you to get burned in the modern world. You need skin that has been depigmented over thousands of years for a low-sun environment. Then you need to be moved out of that environment, by aircraft, in about 4 hours, which is faster than any process in this entire story by a factor of roughly 100 million. Then you need to lie down and stay still in the strongest sunlight available, on purpose, for pleasure, which is a concept your ancestors would have found completely deranged. And then you need to forget to bring the one thing that fixes the whole problem, which has existed since the 1930s and costs about the same as a sandwich, That combination is about 70 years old. Your skin is not badly made. Your skin is extremely well made for somewhere else. Every part of this is a correct answer to a question that was being asked at the time. The fur came off because we needed to run in the heat. The pigment came in because bare skin on the equator was killing our children before they were born. The pigment came back out because a body in Northern Europe cannot build a skeleton in the dark. 3 good decisions. None of them consulted about the fourth thing, which is you, in a swimsuit, asleep on a lounger in Spain. So the next time it happens, and it will happen, and you are lying awake at 2 in the morning trying to work out which side of your body hurts less, you can at least be precise about what you are feeling. That is not a design flaw. That is a million years of excellent decisions, arriving all at once, on the wrong continent.